The deputy's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on blood-soaked scrubs and military dog tags hanging from a rearview mirror. "Stolen valor," he muttered into his radio, reaching for his handcuffs. The blonde woman at the pump didn't move, didn't argue, just locked eyes with him through the cruiser's windshield. 3 miles down the highway, a prison transport was about to flip into a fireball. 12 officers would be bleeding out on asphalt within the hour. And the fake soldier this cop was about to arrest? She'd spent 7 years keeping Marines alive under rocket fire in places he couldn't pronounce. Tonight, the whole county was going to learn what happens when you humiliate someone who's already survived hell. Before we dive in, if you're here for the whole story, stay until the very end. Like this video if you want justice served cold, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The fluorescent lights in Mercy Point Regional Hospital buzzed like angry wasps at 11:47 p.m., casting sickly shadows across Trauma Bay 3. Sarah Reeves stood motionless beside the operating table, her pale green scrubs already speckled with blood that wasn't hers, watching Dr. Marcus Brennan make the same mistake for the third time in as many weeks. "Suction," Brennan barked, not looking up. The surgical tech complied immediately. Sarah's jaw tightened. The patient, a 52-year-old construction worker named Davies, had been coding for 90 seconds. His BP was crashing, and Brennan was still focused on the wrong bleeder. "Doctor?" Sarah's voice was quiet but carried across the room anyway. "The hemorrhage is retroperitoneal. I need you to do your job and monitor vitals." Brennan cut her off without glancing away from his work. "I didn't ask for a diagnosis from the nursing staff." Two residents exchanged glances. The anesthesiologist kept his eyes locked on his monitors, suddenly fascinated by numbers he'd been watching for 20 minutes. Sarah stepped closer to the table. "His pressure's dropping because you're not controlling the actual source. If you don't clamp the—" "Miss Reeves," Brennan finally looked up, his face flushed above his surgical mask. "Step back from my table. Now." The room went silent, except for the persistent beeping of the heart monitor, beeping that was getting slower, more irregular. Sarah didn't move. "He's going to arrest." "Security," Brennan said into the air, his voice tight. "Remove this nurse from my OR." "You're going to kill him," Sarah said flatly. The heart monitor flatlined. For exactly 4 seconds, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted, residents scrambling, the crash cart wheeling in, someone calling for EPI. Brennan started compressions while simultaneously screaming orders, his earlier confidence evaporating into panic. Sarah watched from where security had backed her against the wall. She tracked every movement, every decision, cataloging the mistakes in real time. When the surgical resident finally found the bleeder she'd identified, exactly where she'd said it would be, and clamped it, Davies's vitals began stabilizing. Brennan didn't acknowledge it, didn't look at her, just continued working like the near death had been unavoidable, like he'd been right all along. 30 minutes later, Davies was stable and transferred to ICU. Sarah was in Administrator Helen Voss's office, still wearing bloody scrubs, while Brennan sat in the guest chair looking like a man who'd just won a verdict. "Dr. Brennan has formally requested your immediate termination," Voss said, her fingers steepled on the desk between them. "He's citing insubordination, disruption of a sterile surgical environment, and practicing medicine without a license." Sarah stared at her. "I stopped him from killing a patient." "You questioned a physician's judgment in front of his entire team," Voss replied. "You undermined his authority during a critical procedure. His judgment was wrong. That's not your determination to make." Sarah's hands curled into fists at her sides. 7 years. 7 years in field hospitals, where the only thing between wounded soldiers and body bags was her hands and her training. 7 years treating sucking chest wounds and traumatic amputations while mortars shook dust from the ceiling. 7 years where nobody cared about hierarchy when someone was bleeding out. "I've treated trauma that would make Davies look like a paper cut," Sarah said quietly. "I know what internal bleeding looks like. I know what happens when you ignore it." Brennan leaned forward. "Where exactly did you get this vast surgical experience? Night shift at a county hospital?" "Army combat hospitals. 3 deployments. Forward surgical teams attached to—" "Oh, here we go." Brennan's laugh was sharp, theatrical. "The war hero act. Let me guess, you're some kind of secret special forces medic?" Sarah's expression didn't change. I was an Army nurse, trauma specialist. I've done more emergency procedures in field conditions than most residents see in... Enough! Voss held up one hand. Dr. Brennan is chief of surgery. His word carries considerable weight, and frankly, Miss Reeves, your record here has been problematic. Problematic how? Voss pulled out a thin folder. You've contradicted attending physicians on 4 separate occasions in the past 6 months. You've bypassed protocol to order tests without authorization. You've made nurses and residents uncomfortable with your intensity. I've caught mistakes that would have killed people. You've created a hostile work environment, Brennan interjected. You treat everyone like they're incompetent. You act like you're the only person here who knows anything. Sarah turned to look at him fully for the first time. I act like someone who's watched people die from stupid, preventable mistakes. Because I have. Your military service, real or imagined, doesn't give you the right to... Real or imagined? Sarah's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Brennan smirked. I've seen plenty of people claim military experience to make themselves sound impressive. It's usually the ones who never actually served who talk about it the most. The room went very quiet. Voss cleared her throat. Regardless of your background, Miss Reeves, the fact remains that you cannot continue working here if you can't follow proper hierarchy and protocol. I'm accepting Dr. Brennan's recommendation. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. Sarah stared at her for a long moment. You're firing me for being right. I'm firing you for insubordination and creating an unsafe work environment through repeated conflicts with senior staff. Davies is alive because I spoke up. Davies nearly died because you disrupted the surgical team's focus, Brennan countered smoothly. If you'd stayed in your lane and let me work, we wouldn't have had that close call. Sarah laughed, a short, harsh sound without any humor in it. You're actually rewriting what happened, right now, in real time. I think we're done here. Voss stood. Security will escort you out. You'll receive your final paycheck by mail. I'd suggest you think carefully about your next steps, Miss Reeves. A termination like this on your record will make it very difficult to work in healthcare again. Sarah didn't move. You know what's going to happen, right? You know he's going to keep making mistakes, and eventually someone won't be lucky enough to survive them. Out. Now. 20 minutes later, Sarah walked through the hospital's main entrance for the last time. She'd changed out of her scrubs into jeans and a worn army jacket, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The night air was cool against her face, carrying the smell of coming rain. Behind her, she heard Brennan's voice, loud and performative. Hey, Reeves! She turned. He stood in the doorway, backlit by the hospital's fluorescent glow, that same smirk on his face. Do me a favor, he called out. Take that costume off before someone mistakes you for actual military. Nobody's buying your little combat medic fantasy. Several people in the parking lot turned to look. A couple of nurses on smoke break. A patient's family loading into their car. Sarah held his gaze for 3 long seconds. Then she turned and walked away without responding. She drove south on Highway 71, out of Pinehurst, and into the empty stretches of East Texas farmland that spread like dark water under the night sky. Her hands were steady on the wheel. Her mind was quiet. She'd learned a long time ago that rage was useless unless you could channel it into something productive. And right now there was nothing to be done except keep driving. The gas station appeared out of the darkness like a small island of light. A rundown Texaco on the edge of Coldwell County, the kind of place that existed purely for forgotten travelers and long-haul truckers. Sarah pulled up to Pump 7 and killed the engine. She was halfway through fueling when she noticed the patrol car. It had been parked on the far side of the lot, barely visible in the shadows, but now it was rolling forward slowly, deliberately, the kind of approach cops made when they'd already decided you were worth watching. Sarah kept her movements casual, finished pumping, replaced the nozzle. The cruiser stopped 20 feet away, and a deputy climbed out, young, probably mid-20s, with the kind of swagger that came from a badge and not much else. Evening, he said, his hand resting on his belt near his weapon. Evening, Sarah replied neutrally. His eyes tracked across her car, lingering on the military dog tags hanging from her rear-view mirror, the Army Medical Corps decal on her back window, the veteran plates. Those your tags? He asked. Yes. Military, huh? Former Army nurse. He walked closer, his flashlight clicking on, the beam sweeping across her car's interior. You got ID. Sarah reached slowly for her wallet, pulled out her driver's license and her VA medical card. The deputy, his name tag read Cole, barely glanced at them before his attention returned to the dog tags. Where'd you serve? His tone made it sound like a challenge, not a question. Germany, Kuwait, Afghanistan. Afghanistan. Cole nodded slowly, like he'd just confirmed something. Combat? Combat support hospitals, trauma units. Uh-huh. His flashlight beam landed on her duffel bag in the back seat, where her old Army patrol cap sat on top, the medical corps insignia clearly visible. You got any proof of that service? Discharge papers, DD-214? Sarah's jaw tightened. Not on me. Why? Just seems like a lot of military gear for someone I've never seen around here before. Cole's smile didn't reach his eyes. You'd be surprised how many people try to fake military service. Stolen valor's a real problem. I'm not faking anything. So you say. He leaned against her car, casual but blocking her path to the driver's door. Here's the thing, I've got a buddy who served. Real hero, Purple Heart, and he tells me stories about all the phonies he meets. People who buy uniforms at surplus stores, claim they were special forces, make up all kinds of stories. I didn't claim to be special forces. I said I was a nurse. With combat experience. Yes. In Afghanistan. Yes. Cole's radio crackled. He ignored it. What unit? 274th Forward Surgical Team, later attached to CASEVAC operations with the 101st. The words meant nothing to him. Sarah could see it in his blank expression. He was looking for hesitation, for her to slip up, not actually verifying information. Those tags look pretty new, he said. They're replacements. I lost my originals in... Let me see them. Sarah reached through her window and unhooked the tags from the mirror. Cole took them, examining them under his flashlight like he knew what he was looking for. He didn't. Sarah Reeves, he read aloud. O positive. No religious preference. He looked up. These could be anybody's tags. They're mine. My service number's on there. Easy to fake, Cole cut her off. You know what I think? I think you're one of those people who likes to play dress up, likes the respect that comes with military service without actually earning it. Sarah's hands curled at her sides. Call Fort Campbell. They'll verify my service, or check the VA database. My records are... I don't need to call anybody. Cole's voice hardened. What I need is for you to admit you're running some kind of scam here. I'm not. Turn around, hands on the car. Sarah stared at him. You're arresting me? I'm detaining you for suspected stolen valor and possession of military property under false pretenses. Turn around. This is insane. I just told you how to verify... Cole's hand moved to his weapon. I'm not going to ask again. For a moment, Sarah considered refusing, considered making him escalate this into something he'd regret. But she'd learned the hard way that fighting cops in parking lots only ever ended one way, regardless of who was right. She turned slowly, placing her hands on the hood of her car. The metal was still warm from the engine. Cole jerked her arms behind her back, the handcuffs clicking shut with practiced efficiency. You have the right to remain silent. Sarah tuned out the Miranda rights she'd heard 100 times in movies. Her mind was already working through the next steps, how long she'd be held, who she'd need to call, how much this was going to cost her in time and lawyers and humiliation. Through the gas station's window, she could see the clerk watching nervously. A truck driver had pulled out his phone, filming. This was going to be online before sunrise. Do you understand these rights as I've explained them? Cole finished. Yes, Sarah said quietly. Good. He started walking her toward his cruiser. Fake soldiers like you make me sick. Real veterans put their lives on the line, and you just... The radio on his belt erupted in a burst of static and panicked voices. Multiple casualties. Interstate 44. Need all available units. Cole stopped walking. His hand went to the radio. Say again? All units, all units. Prison transport collision at mile marker 73. Mass casualty event. Officers down. Repeat. Officers down. Another voice cut in, younger, terrified. We need medical now. Multiple critical injuries. We've got... Oh, Jesus, we need... Cole stood frozen for 3 seconds, his training warring with the situation at hand. Then he shoved Sarah toward the cruiser. "Get in! Wait! Get in!" He pushed her into the back seat and slammed the door. Through the window, Sarah watched him run toward the driver's side, speaking rapidly into his radio. The cruiser's engine roared to life, lights flashing, and they were moving before she'd even processed what was happening. The speedometer climbed past 90. Cole drove with one hand, the other holding his radio as dispatch kept feeding him fragmentary information. Prison transport, explosion, fire, multiple vehicles, officers trapped. Sarah braced herself in the back seat, still handcuffed, watching the dark highway blur past. The irony wasn't lost on her. Arrested for fake military service, now being dragged toward exactly the kind of situation she'd actually trained for. They crested a hill, and the scene appeared below them like something from a war zone. Flames rose 30 feet in the air from what had been a prison transport bus, now on its side across both lanes. 2 patrol cars were smashed into the guardrail. An ambulance sat at an angle, its rear doors hanging open, equipment scattered across the asphalt. People were running, screaming, dragging bodies away from the fire. Cole hit the brakes, and they skidded to a stop 50 yards back. He was out of the car before it fully stopped moving, sprinting toward the chaos. Sarah sat alone in the back seat, watching through the window as the scene unfolded. A deputy stumbled past the cruiser, his uniform soaked with blood. His own or someone else's, impossible to tell. Another cop was screaming into a radio about needing helicopters. A paramedic knelt beside someone on the ground, hands pressed to their chest, face white with panic. Sarah closed her eyes, counted to 5. Opened them again. Nothing had changed. The scene was still chaos. People were still dying, and she was sitting in handcuffs in the back of a patrol car because some small-town deputy thought her dog tags looked too new. She tested the cuffs. Standard issue, properly locked, no chance of slipping them. The cruiser's back doors had no interior handles. She couldn't get out even if she tried. Through the windshield, she watched Cole run toward a cluster of officers surrounding someone on the ground. Watched him stop, stare, then turn and scan the area like he was looking for something he'd lost. Then his eyes landed on the cruiser. On her. He started running back, his face transformed from focused to desperate. He yanked open the back door and Sarah nearly fell out. "You!" he gasped. "You said you were a combat medic." "Combat nurse," Sarah corrected automatically. "Trauma specialist. Can you help them?" Sarah looked past him at the carnage, at the flames, at the bodies. "Uncuff me." Cole hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he was fumbling with his keys, hands shaking, unlocking the cuffs. Sarah felt them fall away and immediately started rolling her shoulders, getting blood flow back. "How many critical?" she asked, already moving toward the scene. "I don't, at least 4, maybe more." Sarah was running before he finished answering. The heat from the fire hit her first, then the smell, burning fuel and rubber, and something worse underneath. She'd smelled it before, in places she tried not to remember. Her mind shifted gears automatically, falling into patterns worn deep by repetition and necessity. Triage. OBC. Stop the bleeding, keep them breathing. Everything else was secondary. The first casualty was a state trooper, maybe 40, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound that had already soaked through someone's improvised bandage. Sarah dropped beside him, fingers going to his neck. Pulse present, but weak. Breathing shallow. "Get me something to elevate his legs," she snapped at the nearest person. A young paramedic who looked about 16 and completely lost. We don't, anything, backpack, duffel bag, move." The kid scrambled away. Sarah ripped open the trooper's shirt, checking for additional injuries. Found a deep laceration across his ribs, bad but not immediately life-threatening. The head wound was the priority. She needed to stop the bleeding and prevent shock. The paramedic came back with a medical bag. Sarah grabbed it without looking, pulled out trauma shears, gauze, tape. Her hands moved on autopilot while her eyes scanned the rest of the scene, categorizing injuries, prioritizing. "You!" She pointed at another deputy standing nearby, frozen. "That officer there, the one on his side, roll him onto his back and check if he's breathing. If he's not, start compressions. Don't stop until I get there." The deputy didn't move. "Now!" He jolted into motion. Sarah finished packing the trooper's head wound and moved to the next casualty, a corrections officer who was conscious but had a piece of metal debris embedded in his thigh, blood pulsing around it with each heartbeat. Arterial bleed. Minutes at most. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside him. "Miller," he gasped. "Oh God, it hurts." "I know. Listen to me, Miller. That metal is the only thing keeping you from bleeding out right now. I need to stabilize it, then we'll get you transported, but I need you to stay still. Can you do that?" Yes, just... Sarah was already working, packing gauze around the debris, creating enough pressure to slow the bleeding without pushing the metal deeper. She needed surgical clamps and a proper OR, but this wasn't a hospital. This was a highway in the middle of nowhere with limited supplies and too many casualties. This was exactly like Kandahar. The thought came unbidden, and she shoved it away. Focus. Present moment. This patient. "Somebody get me 2 units of O-neg from the ambulance," she shouted. "The ambulance is... it's locked. Driver's unconscious." Sarah swore under her breath. "Then get him conscious or break the damn window. This man needs blood now." She moved to the next casualty, then the next, then back to the first trooper whose breathing had become more labored. Every movement was calculated, efficient, no wasted motion. She talked constantly, giving orders, asking questions, keeping people moving because movement meant they weren't freezing up, weren't panicking. Somewhere in the chaos, she became aware of more people arriving. Fire trucks, more ambulances, deputies from neighboring counties. They all stopped and stared at the scene, at the carnage, at the flames, at the handful of people trying to hold everything together, at the blonde woman in civilian clothes and an old army jacket covered in blood, running the entire operation like a field commander. Cole appeared beside her as she was starting an IV on a corrections officer whose blood pressure was bottoming out. "They're asking who's in charge of triage," he said quietly. "I am," Sarah replied without looking up. "Tell them we need immediate transport for this one, and the trooper with the head wound. The others can wait for the second wave. They want to know who you are. Tell them I'm the woman you arrested for stolen valor 20 minutes ago." Cole's face went white. "Later," Sarah said. "Right now I need someone to..." A sound cut through the night, low and rhythmic, growing louder. Everyone stopped and looked up. 2 black helicopters appeared over the tree line, running lights cutting through the smoke. Military birds flying fast and low. They descended toward a clear section of highway 100 yards north, rotors whipping the air into fury. Sarah kept working, but her stomach dropped. She knew those helicopters, knew what it meant when they showed up at civilian emergencies. Someone had made a very important phone call. The helicopters touched down and soldiers poured out. Not National Guard, but active duty, moving with the kind of precision that came from actual combat experience. They spread across the scene in a coordinated pattern, carrying medical gear, setting up a triage station with practiced efficiency. Then a figure emerged from the lead helicopter. Tall, wearing AC-US with rank insignia that made several nearby deputies stand straighter. He walked directly through the chaos, ignoring everyone else, his eyes locked on Sarah. She looked up from her patient, and their eyes met. "Lieutenant Reeves," Colonel Marcus Henshaw said, his voice carrying despite the noise. "Someone want to tell me why one of my former trauma nurses is running a mass casualty event while covered in handcuff marks?" The entire scene went silent except for the crackling fire and the helicopter rotors winding down. Sarah stood slowly, wiping blood off her hands onto her jeans. "I was in the area." Henshaw's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition of her dry humor, the kind that surfaced when everything else was falling apart. "I can see that." He turned to face the crowd of law enforcement and first responders, all of whom were staring now. "I'm Colonel Henshaw, 75th Field Hospital. Miss Reeves served under my command for 5 years in combat hospitals overseas. Someone want to explain to me why she was detained?" Nobody spoke. Henshaw's gaze found Cole, who looked like he wanted the ground to open up and swallow him. "You, deputy? What were the charges?" Cole's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I suspected stolen valor, sir." "Stolen valor," Henshaw repeated the words like they tasted bad. "You arrested a decorated Army trauma nurse for stolen valor." "I didn't know she was..." "Clearly," Henshaw turned back to Sarah. "How many critical?" 4 immediate transport, 2 urgent, 3 walking wounded. Triage categories? Already marked. Red tags are by the ambulances. Henshaw nodded and gestured to his medical team. They moved in immediately, working with the efficiency of people who'd done this hundreds of times. Within minutes, the chaos had transformed into organized, controlled movement. Sarah stepped back, letting the professionals take over. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up. She'd been running on autopilot for the last 40 minutes, muscle memory and training carrying her through. Now that it was over, her body was remembering it was tired and stressed and covered in other people's blood. A state trooper approached Henshaw, notebook in hand. "Colonel, we're going to need statements from everyone involved, including Miss Reeves." "She'll make herself available," Henshaw replied, "after she's been checked by medical and had a chance to clean up." "Sir, she was technically under arrest when... Was she charged?" The trooper glanced at Cole. "Not officially, no." "Then she's free to go, unless you'd like to charge a woman who just saved the lives of 4 of your fellow officers with... What was it? Stolen valor?" Henshaw's tone could have frozen nitrogen. The trooper looked at his notebook, looked at Sarah, looked at the organized triage operation that hadn't existed before she arrived. "No, sir, no charges." "Good call." More vehicles were arriving now. News vans with satellite dishes, additional emergency responders, people with cameras. Sarah could see phones out, recording everything. By morning, this would be all over social media. She thought about Brennan, sitting in his comfortable office at Mercy Point, probably sleeping peacefully. Thought about Administrator Voss and her lectures about protocol and hierarchy. Thought about the termination letter that would be arriving in her mailbox any day now. They'd fired her for knowing too much, for being right, for not staying in her lane. And 6 hours later, she'd been the only person at a mass casualty scene with enough experience to keep people alive until real help arrived. "Lieutenant?" Sarah blinked. Henshaw was standing in front of her, holding out a bottle of water. She took it automatically. "You did good work here," he said quietly, low enough that only she could hear. "Textbook triage under chaotic conditions. You haven't lost your edge." "Thank you, sir." "Why were you really driving through Coldwell County at midnight?" Sarah took a drink of water. "Got fired from my nursing job, heading south." Henshaw's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Fired for what?" "Insubordination, contradicting a surgeon during an emergency procedure." "Were you right?" "Yes." "Then they're idiots." He glanced around at the scene, at the deputies watching them, at the news cameras setting up. "This is going to get complicated, you know. Media's already here. Someone's going to want the story of the mysterious civilian who took charge before we arrived. I just did what needed doing." "I know. That's what worries me." Henshaw studied her face. "You look exhausted." "Long night." "Where are you staying?" "Haven't decided yet." He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to her. "My direct line. You need anything, statement of service, character reference, place to crash, you call me. Clear?" Sarah took the card. "Clear." Henshaw turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. That deputy who arrested you, Cole, he's going to have a very bad week when his body cam footage gets reviewed. Might want to stay available in case Internal Affairs needs your statement." "I'm not looking for revenge, sir." "I know you're not, but justice and revenge aren't always the same thing." He nodded once and walked back toward the helicopters. Sarah stood alone in the flashing lights, watching the organized chaos continue around her. Paramedics were loading the critical patients into medical helicopters. Fire crews were containing the fuel spill. Investigators were photographing the wreckage. And Cole was standing by his cruiser, talking to a senior officer, his face ashen as he gestured and explained and probably realized his career was circling the drain. Sarah felt nothing looking at him. No satisfaction, no anger, just emptiness. She'd spent the last 7 years learning that the universe didn't care about fairness or justice. Bad things happen to good people. Good things happen to terrible people. The only thing you could control was your own actions in the moment. She'd acted. The rest was just noise. A hand touched her shoulder and she turned to find a young paramedic, the same kid she'd ordered around during the crisis. "Hey," he said nervously. I wanted to say thank you. I was freezing up out there and you kind of got me moving." "You did good," Sarah said. "First mass casualty?" "Yeah, does it get easier?" "No, you just get better at functioning while terrified." He laughed weakly. That's not reassuring. Wasn't meant to be. Sarah smiled slightly. But you kept moving when it mattered. That's what counts. The kid nodded and headed back to his ambulance. Sarah watched him go, then turned and started walking toward her car, still parked at the Texaco station, somehow untouched by the surrounding chaos. She was halfway there when she heard her name. Reeves! She turned. A deputy was jogging toward her, someone she didn't recognize, older, with gray in his hair and sergeant stripes on his sleeve. You need something? Sarah asked. Just wanted to shake your hand. He extended it. I'm Sergeant Hayes. That trooper with the head wound, Parker. He's my nephew. Doctors are saying another 5 minutes and he wouldn't have made it. Sarah shook his hand. He's young and strong. He'll be okay. Because of you. Because of a lot of people doing their jobs. Hayes smiled slightly. You military types are all the same. Can't take a damn compliment. His expression sobered. I heard what Cole did. Arresting you. That was bullshit. And I want you to know not all of us are like that. I know. His body cam footage is already being reviewed, and there's civilian video from the gas station. Once that hits social media. Hayes shook his head. He's done. You know that, right? That's not my problem, Sarah said quietly. Maybe not. But you should know, people are going to want to hear your story. News crews are already asking questions. By tomorrow morning, everyone's going to know what happened here. Sarah thought about Brennan again, about his smirk in the hospital parking lot, his public humiliation, his confidence that nothing would touch him. Let them ask, she said. I've got nothing to hide. Hayes nodded and headed back toward the scene. Sarah continued to her car, climbed in, and sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The dog tags were still gone. Cole had them somewhere, probably in an evidence bag. She'd get them back eventually, along with an apology she didn't particularly want or need. Her phone buzzed. Text message from a number she didn't recognize. This is Emma Wilkes, KPRC News. We're covering the highway incident and multiple sources identified you as the civilian who provided emergency medical care. Would you be willing to answer a few questions? Sarah deleted it without responding. Another buzz. Different number. Ms. Reeves, this is James Chen with the Houston Chronicle. I'd like to speak with you about tonight's events and your military background. Delete. Then another. And another. 5 messages in 2 minutes, all from different reporters, all asking variations of the same questions. Sarah turned off her phone and sat in the dark, watching the distant lights from the crash scene paint shadows across her dashboard. Tomorrow, this would be news. Someone would dig up her service record, the parts that were public anyway. Someone would find Mercy Point Hospital and start asking why a decorated combat nurse was fired the same day she saved multiple lives at an accident scene. Someone would find Dr. Marcus Brennan and ask him about his fake soldier comment. And then things were going to get very interesting. Sarah started the engine and pulled out of the gas station parking lot, heading south again, away from the chaos and the cameras and the questions. She'd find a motel somewhere, sleep for a few hours, figure out her next move in the morning. Behind her, the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn. Ahead, the road stretched dark and empty. She drove until the lights faded completely in her rearview mirror, until the only sound was the hum of tires on asphalt and the quiet rush of her own breathing. Somewhere back there, Deputy Cole was learning what happened when you humiliated the wrong person. Somewhere back there, Dr. Brennan was about to discover that reputation could be destroyed as quickly as careers. Somewhere back there, the pieces were already falling, gravity finally catching up to men who'd never believed in consequences. But Sarah wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about Parker, the young trooper with the head wound, thinking about how his eyes had fluttered open for just a second before the helicopter took him, how he'd looked at her without recognition or understanding, just pure confused gratitude. That was the part that mattered. That was the part worth remembering. The rest was just noise. Her phone, still off, sat silent in the cup holder. She didn't need to see the messages to know what they'd say. Didn't need to read the news stories that would be written by morning. The truth was already out there, spreading like wildfire through phone cameras and body cam footage and military records that couldn't be faked or dismissed. By sunrise, everyone would know, and there wouldn't be anywhere left for certain people to hide. The motel was the kind of place people paid cash and didn't ask questions. Sarah pulled into the gravel lot at 4:47 a.m., the neon vacancy sign flickering like a dying heartbeat. Her clothes were still stiff with dried blood. Her hands smelled like antiseptic and burned rubber, no matter how many times she'd tried wiping them clean. The clerk barely looked up when she paid for the room, handed her a key attached to a plastic diamond keychain, and went back to his phone. Sarah locked the door behind her and stood in the middle of the room for a full minute, just breathing. The adrenaline crash was hitting now, muscles trembling, thoughts fragmenting, that hollow feeling spreading through her chest like ice water. She'd felt this before. Kandahar, Bagram. Every time after a mass casualty event when the quiet finally came and your body remembered it was supposed to be terrified. She stripped off her jacket and jeans, left them in a pile on the bathroom floor, and stood under the shower until the water ran cold. Watched pink-tinged water circle the drain. Thought about Parker and Miller and the corrections officer whose name she'd never learned. Thought about Cole's face when the helicopters arrived. When she finally climbed into bed, it was past 6. Outside, the sky was turning gray with morning. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept replaying the scene. The flames, the screaming, Henshaw's expression when he'd said, "Someone want to tell me why one of my former trauma nurses is running a mass casualty event while covered in handcuff marks." Her phone was still off. She left it that way. She woke 4 hours later to someone pounding on her door. Sarah sat up fast, instinct taking over before consciousness fully returned. The pounding continued, hard, insistent, official. "Sarah Reeves, this is Sheriff Tom Granger, Coldwell County. I need to speak with you." Sarah pulled on clean clothes and opened the door. The sheriff was in his 50s, weathered face and tired eyes, holding a manila folder under one arm. Behind him stood 2 deputies, both looking uncomfortable. "Sheriff," Sarah said neutrally. "Miss Reeves, sorry to wake you." Granger didn't sound sorry. He sounded like a man who'd been dealing with a political nightmare for the last 6 hours. "Mind if I come in?" Sarah stepped aside. Granger entered alone, gesturing for his deputies to wait outside. He sat in the room's single chair without being invited, opened his folder and pulled out a tablet. "You've been busy," he said, tapping the screen. "This video has 3 million views already." He turned the tablet toward her. The screen showed grainy cell phone footage from the gas station. Sarah in handcuffs, Cole pushing her toward the cruiser, the audio catching his voice. "Fake soldiers like you make me sick." Then a hard cut to the crash scene. Sarah on her knees beside Parker, hands moving with practiced efficiency, shouting orders while deputies stood frozen. Someone had edited it for maximum impact. Military service mentioned, arrest. Then heroic emergency response. The comment section was already a war zone. "That's not the worst one," Granger said quietly. He swiped to another video. "This one's got 8 million. The second video was Cole's body cam footage. Someone had leaked it, probably another deputy, possibly Hayes. It showed everything. The initial stop. Cole's accusations. Sarah calmly explaining her service. Cole refusing to verify anything, just assumption and aggression, and that final line about fake soldiers. Then the dispatch call. The drive. The scene. And finally, Sarah stepping out of the cruiser still in handcuffs and immediately taking charge while Cole stood there looking lost. The video ended with Henshaw's arrival and his question about why a decorated trauma nurse was detained. "Internal Affairs is already investigating," Granger said. "Cole's suspended pending review, but that's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" Granger closed the folder. "Because about 2 hours ago, I got a call from the governor's office. Apparently someone forwarded them the videos along with your service record, the public parts anyway. They want to know why one of my deputies arrested a veteran who then saved multiple lives." "I don't need an apology," Sarah said. "Good, because you're not getting one from me. Cole's actions are his own." Granger leaned back in the chair. "But I need to know what happened at that hospital, Mercy Point Regional, because reporters are already digging, and I need to know what they're going to find before they find it." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed. "I was fired for insubordination, questioned a surgeon's judgment during an emergency procedure. Patient survived because I was right. Got fired anyway." "The surgeon have a name?" "Dr. Marcus Brennan, Chief of Surgery." Granger typed something on his phone. "And you didn't file a complaint? Didn't fight the termination?" "What's the point? It's his word against mine. He's Chief of Surgery. I'm just a nurse." Sarah heard the bitterness in her own voice and didn't bother hiding it. "Except you're not just a nurse. Granger said slowly. "You're a decorated combat veteran with 5 years of trauma experience in active war zones, and now there's video of you running a mass casualty scene better than most trained first responders." He put his phone away. "Miss Reeves, whether you want it or not, you're about to become a very public story. And when that happens, people are going to look at everyone who wronged you and start asking questions." "That's not my problem." "No, but it's mine because Cole works for me, and this makes my entire department look incompetent." Granger stood. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give a formal statement to Internal Affairs about the arrest. You're going to cooperate with the state's investigation into the accident response. And in return, I'm going to make sure nobody in my department bothers you again. I don't need protection. I know you don't, but you're getting it anyway, because the alternative is my entire county looking like we harass veterans." He headed for the door, then stopped. "One more thing. That surgeon, Brennan, you might want to turn your phone on. Something tells me he's having a very bad morning." After Granger left, Sarah sat alone in the quiet room. She could hear traffic outside, voices from the parking lot, the normal sounds of the world continuing like nothing had changed. But something had changed. She could feel it, that shift in pressure before a storm, the way the air gets heavy and waiting. She turned on her phone. It exploded with notifications, texts, emails, voicemails, social media tags she didn't know existed. She scrolled through the messages, skimming subject lines and preview text. Interview request, veteran story statement needed, hospital termination, legal representation available. We stand with you. Then one message that made her stop scrolling. From an unknown number sent at 7:23 a.m. "This is Amanda Cross, investigative reporter with KSAT San Antonio. I've been researching Mercy Point Regional Hospital for 3 months. Dr. Marcus Brennan has a history of medical malpractice complaints that were buried by administration. If you're willing to talk, I can help make sure people know the truth. No pressure. But you deserve to know you weren't the first nurse he destroyed." Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Then she opened her email and found 17 similar messages from different reporters, all saying variations of the same thing. They'd been investigating. They'd found patterns. They wanted to talk. She closed the email without responding and opened her social media. The videos Granger had shown her were everywhere, spreading across platforms, being shared and reshared with commentary ranging from supportive to outraged to conspiracist. But there was another video she hadn't seen yet, posted 2 hours ago by someone named Jennifer Wu, a surgical resident at Mercy Point. Sarah clicked play. The video was filmed secretly, probably on a phone hidden in a pocket. It showed the interior of an operating room, the one where Davies had nearly died. The timestamp put it at 11:39 p.m., 8 minutes before the crisis. Brennan's voice came through clearly. "I don't care what she thinks she saw. Nurses don't make diagnostic decisions." Another voice, quieter. "But, doctor, if there's a chance she's right about the retroperitoneal, then I'll find it when I find it. I'm not going to let some washed-up military burnout second-guess my surgical judgment." The video ended. The comments were brutal. Medical professionals from across the country weighing in, analyzing the language, pointing out the dismissiveness and arrogance. Someone had cross-referenced Davies' case file, which should have been private but somehow wasn't, and highlighted every decision Sarah had questioned and every complication that resulted from Brennan ignoring her. Sarah's hands were shaking again. Not from fear, from rage. She'd been right. About all of it. And Brennan had known she was right and fired her anyway because his ego couldn't handle being corrected by a nurse. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then changed her mind at the last second. "This is Sarah. Miss Reeves, my name is David Mora. I'm an attorney specializing in wrongful termination and whistleblower protection." The voice was professional, measured. "I've been following your situation, and I'd like to offer my services pro bono if you're interested in pursuing legal action against Mercy Point Regional Hospital." "I'm not interested in lawsuits." "I understand, but you should know that 3 other nurses from Mercy Point have contacted me in the last 4 hours. They all have similar stories about Dr. Brennan: ignored warnings, retaliation for speaking up, terminations for questioning his judgment. You're not the first. You're just the first one with video evidence and a viral story." Sarah closed her eyes. "How many patients?" "Excuse me?" How many patients were hurt because of complaints that got buried? Maura was quiet for a moment. We don't have exact numbers yet, but based on preliminary research, at least a dozen cases where outcomes were significantly worse than they should have been, maybe more. Jesus. Miss Reeves, with your testimony and these other nurses willing to come forward, we can build a case that forces real accountability, not just for Brennan, but for the entire administrative structure that protected him. Sarah opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. I need to think about it. Of course. Take your time. But you should know, the medical board is already getting calls. The state health department is reviewing Mercy Point's accreditation. This is happening whether you participate or not. The question is whether you want to help guide it toward actual change. After Maura hung up, Sarah sat in silence for several minutes. Then she opened the message from Amanda Cross and typed a response. I'll talk. But not for sympathy. For documentation. People need to know what happens when hospitals value hierarchy over patient safety. The reply came back in seconds. That's exactly why I want to talk to you. I can meet you anywhere, anytime. This story needs to be told. Sarah gave her the motel address and a time, 3 p.m., after she'd had a chance to eat something and pull herself together. Then she started scrolling through the rest of the messages, looking for patterns. Reporters, lawyers, veterans advocacy groups, medical reform organizations, people who'd worked with Brennan and had stories, people who'd been patients and had complaints. The whole thing was snowballing faster than she'd imagined possible. Her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a Pinehurst area code, Mercy Point City. She answered, Miss Reeves, this is Helen Voss. The administrator's voice was tight, controlled, nothing like the confident authority from last night. I wanted to reach out personally regarding your termination. You mean the termination you approved 6 hours before I saved 4 people's lives? Silence. Then, there have been some developments since our last conversation. New information has come to light regarding Dr. Brennan's professional conduct. The board would like to offer you reinstatement with full back pay and a formal apology. Sarah laughed. Actually laughed, cold and sharp. You're offering me my job back? Yes. We recognize that mistakes were made in how your concerns were mistakes. Sarah stood up, pacing the small room. You called it insubordination. You threatened my license. Brennan publicly humiliated me in your parking lot, and you did nothing. Dr. Brennan's comments were inappropriate and not reflective of, where is he right now? Voss hesitated. He's been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. Internal review, not fired, not reported to the medical board, just administrative leave while you wait for this to blow over. Miss Reeves, I understand you're upset, but I'm not upset. I'm watching you try to protect your hospital's reputation instead of actually fixing the problem. Sarah's voice was quiet now, dangerous. How many other nurses did Brennan get fired? How many complaints did you bury? I can't discuss personnel matters. Then we're done talking. Sarah hung up and immediately blocked the number. Her hands were steady now. The rage had crystallized into something colder, clearer. She opened her laptop and started writing. Everything. Davy's case, the argument in the OR, Brennan's public humiliation, Voss's threats, the termination. She documented it all with timestamps and details and direct quotes she'd been trained to remember from years of writing combat medical reports. When she finished, she had 12 pages of single-space text that read like a horror story about institutional failure and protected incompetence. She saved it, backed it up to the cloud, then sent copies to Maura and Cross. If they wanted documentation, she'd give them documentation. At 2:47 p.m., Sarah walked to the motel's small lobby and bought a coffee from the vending machine. It tasted like hot cardboard, but the caffeine helped. She was finishing it when a woman in her 30s entered. Professional, but not formal, blazer and jeans, camera bag over one shoulder. Sarah Reeves? Amanda Cross? They shook hands. Cross had sharp eyes that cataloged everything, the kind of observation that came from years of investigative work. Thanks for meeting with me, Cross said. I know this has been a hell of a few days. You could say that. They sat in Sarah's room. Cross pulled out a recording device and notebook, but didn't turn anything on yet. Before we start, I want to be clear about something, she said. I've been investigating Mercy Point for months. Started with a tip about surgical complications being underreported, found patterns of staff complaints being dismissed. Then I found Brennan. What did you find? Cross opened her notebook and flipped through several pages covered in dense handwriting. In the last 4 years, Dr. Marcus Brennan has had 11 formal complaints filed against him by nursing staff. All 11 were investigated internally and dismissed. 5 of those nurses no longer work at Mercy Point. 3 left healthcare entirely. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. And the patients? 8 malpractice claims settled quietly out of court. 4 patients died from complications that, according to medical experts I consulted, should have been prevented if warnings from nursing staff had been heeded. Cross looked up. Your case with Davies? That's not unique. That's his pattern. How is he still practicing? Because Helen Voss runs Mercy Point like a fiefdom, and Brennan brings in revenue through complex surgeries. As long as the settlements stay quiet and the money keeps flowing, nobody asks hard questions. Cross set down her notebook. Until now. Until you. I didn't do anything special. You survived long enough for it to matter. You had military credentials that couldn't be dismissed as easily. You saved lives on camera in a way that made everyone look closely at why you'd been fired. Cross leaned forward. Sarah, you're not just a wronged employee. You're the crack in a dam that's been holding back years of buried truth. Sarah was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? Everything. On the record, I want to publish a comprehensive investigation into Mercy Point's pattern of silencing nursing staff and protecting incompetent physicians. But I need your testimony as the anchor. And if I say no, then I publish what I have and hope it's enough. But it won't have the same impact. You're the story everyone's already following. Your voice carries weight right now that mine doesn't. Sarah thought about the other nurses, the ones who'd been fired and silenced and driven out of healthcare. Thought about the patients who'd died because warnings were ignored. Turn on your recorder, she said. They talked for 3 hours. Sarah laid out everything, every detail of Davies' surgery, every warning she'd given, every moment of Brennan's dismissiveness. She talked about her military service when Cross asked, but kept it factual, clinical. She wasn't interested in being painted as a hero. She was interested in establishing credibility. When they finished, Cross packed up her equipment with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just landed a career-defining story. This is going to run in 2 days, she said. I'll send you a draft for fact-checking tomorrow. And Sarah? Thank you. This matters. After Cross left, Sarah sat alone again. The sun was setting outside, painting the motel parking lot in orange and shadow. Her phone buzzed with another message. This one from Maura. 3 more nurses contacted me today. All from Mercy Point. All with similar stories. If you're willing to be the lead plaintiff, we can file a class action suit by end of week. Another buzz. Different number. Miss Reeves, this is Dr. Richard Torres, State Medical Board. We're opening a formal investigation into Dr. Brennan's medical license. Your testimony would be valuable. Please contact my office. Then another. Sarah, it's Jennifer Wu from Mercy Point. I'm the resident who posted that OR video. I'm done protecting him. If you need more witnesses, I'll testify. Sarah read through the messages slowly. 5 nurses willing to come forward, a reporter ready to publish, the medical board investigating, lawyers building a case. The dam wasn't just cracking, it was about to break completely. She was composing a response to Maura when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a Pinehurst number she didn't recognize. Hello? Is this Sarah Reeves? The voice was young, male, nervous. Who's asking? My name is Daniel Patterson. I was a patient at Mercy Point 3 months ago. Dr. Brennan performed my appendectomy. He took a shaky breath. I almost died because he ignored the nurses who said something was wrong. I've been trying to get answers ever since, but the hospital keeps stonewalling me. Then I saw the videos, and I think you're the nurse who tried to help me. Sarah's mind raced back through cases. Patterson. Emergency appendectomy. Post-op complications. She'd warned Brennan about signs of internal bleeding, and he'd dismissed her as paranoid. I remember you, she said quietly. I spent 2 weeks in ICU. They told my family it was normal complications, but I heard nurses talking when they thought I was asleep. I heard them say Brennan missed something, that someone had tried to warn him. Patterson's voice cracked. Was that you? Yes. then I owe you my life, and I want to help, however I can. Because if he did this to me and he did it to you and he's still working there, he trailed off. Someone has to stop him. Sarah closed her eyes. Daniel, if you testify about what happened to you, it's going to be public. Your medical records will be scrutinized. Are you prepared for that? I don't care. I almost died. My family almost lost me. And he's still there, still operating, still ignoring people who are trying to save lives. His voice steadied. So yeah, I'm prepared. After Patterson hung up, Sarah sat in the gathering darkness and let herself feel the full weight of what was building. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every nurse who'd been silenced, every patient who'd been hurt, every warning that had been ignored in the name of protecting hierarchy and reputation. And it was all about to come crashing down on Marcus Brennan and Helen Voss and everyone who'd enabled them. Her phone buzzed again. This time a news alert. Breaking. State Health Department announces surprise inspection of Mercy Point Regional Hospital. Following viral videos. Sarah clicked the link. The article was brief but pointed. The videos of her arrest and the crash scene had prompted public outcry. The governor's office had ordered an immediate review of Mercy Point's practices. Inspectors were already on site. Another alert followed seconds later. Mercy Point chief of surgery placed on leave amid growing scandal. Then another. 5 nurses come forward with complaints against prominent Texas surgeon. Sarah watched the news cycle catch fire in real time. Each story referenced the previous one, building a narrative that was no longer about just her, but about systemic failure and protected incompetence. Her phone rang. Mora. Are you seeing this? He asked without preamble. Yeah. The medical board fast-tracked their investigation. They're reviewing Brennan's entire surgical history going back 6 years. And Miss Reeves? We just got a call from the Department of Justice. They want to know if federal funds were involved in any of the cases where complaints were buried. Sarah stood and walked to the window. Across the parking lot, a news van was pulling in. KPRC Houston, according to the logo. Someone had figured out where she was staying. This is moving faster than I expected, she said. It's moving faster than anyone expected. But that's what happens when you combine viral video, veteran sympathy, and evidence of institutional corruption. Mora paused. Sarah, you need to understand, this is going to get intense. Every decision Brennan ever made will be scrutinized. Every patient he treated will be contacted. This is going to dominate news cycles for weeks. Good. Good? People should know. Patients should know. Other nurses should know they're not alone when they speak up. Sarah's voice was hard. Let it get intense. Let every single person who protected him answer for it. After Mora hung up, Sarah watched the news van park and a reporter climb out, checking her phone, probably trying to confirm the room number. Sarah didn't care. She'd talk to them, or she wouldn't. The story was already out there, spreading like wildfire, beyond anyone's control. She thought about Brennan, wherever he was right now. Probably in his expensive house with his expensive lawyer, watching his career implode in real time. Probably trying to figure out how a simple termination of a problematic nurse had turned into a state investigation and a federal inquiry. Probably realizing too late that humiliating someone in a parking lot and calling their service fake had consequences. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You ruined my career. I hope you're proud. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Then she blocked the number without responding. Another text. Different number. This is Marcus. We need to talk. This has gotten out of hand. I can explain everything if you'll just... Block. Another. Please. My family is getting death threats. This isn't what you wanted, is it? You're better than this. Sarah's jaw tightened. She typed a response. I wanted you to stop killing patients through negligence and arrogance. Everything else is on you. She hit send, then blocked that number too. The reporter from the news van was crossing the parking lot now, heading toward the motel office. Sarah closed the curtains and sat on the bed in darkness. Tomorrow Cross's article would publish. The state investigation would continue. More nurses would come forward. More patients would share stories. The whole rotten structure would be exposed to daylight and scrutiny. And somewhere in all of it, Brennan and Voss and everyone who'd protected the system would finally face something they'd never had to face before. Actual consequences. Sarah's phone lit up with one final message. This one from Colonel Henshaw. Saw the news. I made some calls. You've got the full support of the Veterans Medical Association if you need it. Character witnesses, expert testimony, whatever helps. Let me know. Sarah typed back. Thank you, sir. I will. She set the phone down and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, she could hear the reporter talking to the motel clerk, asking questions, probably offering money for information. Let them ask. Let them dig. Let them find every buried complaint and every silenced nurse and every patient who almost died because warnings were ignored. The truth was coming out whether anyone liked it or not. And Sarah Reeves, the woman they'd tried to break and silence and disgrace, was going to be there to watch every single person who'd wronged her face exactly what they deserved. Her phone buzzed one more time. A news alert. Breaking. Federal investigators arrive at Mercy Point Regional Hospital, employee records seized. Sarah smiled in the darkness. The dam had finally broken. The federal agents arrived at Mercy Point Regional Hospital at 6:14 a.m. with search warrants and enough boxes to carry out a small library. Sarah watched it unfold on live television from her motel room, coffee growing cold in her hand as cameras captured hospital administrators being escorted out of the building while employees stood in clusters, whispering and filming on their phones. By 8:30, Amanda Cross's article had dropped online, silenced. How one Texas hospital protected a dangerous surgeon and destroyed the nurses who tried to stop him. Sarah read it twice. Cross had done her homework, patient interviews, leaked internal memos, testimony from 5 nurses, including Sarah. The article laid out a pattern so clear and damning that even hospital PR couldn't spin it. Brennan's surgical complications, buried complaints, nurses fired for speaking up, Davies nearly dying, Sarah's termination happening hours before she saved lives at a crash scene. The comment section exploded immediately. Medical professionals sharing similar stories, patients demanding investigations at their own hospitals, lawyers offering services. Within an hour, the article had been shared 50,000 times. Sarah's phone rang. Maura. Have you seen the article? He asked. Reading it now. Good. Because we need to move fast. I've got 7 nurses total willing to join the class action suit. 3 patients, including Patterson. And something else. 2 administrators from Mercy Point reached out to me privately. They want to provide testimony about Voss's role in burying complaints. Sarah set down her coffee. Why would they turn on their own hospital? Because federal investigators just seized their employee files and they're looking at potential criminal charges for obstruction if they don't cooperate. Rats leaving a sinking ship. Maura's keyboard clicked in the background. I'm filing the lawsuit today. Wrongful termination, whistleblower retaliation, hostile work environment, medical negligence enabling. We're going after Brennan, Voss, and the hospital corporation. How long until it goes to court? Months, maybe a year. But the discovery process starts immediately, and that's when things get really ugly for them. He paused. Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. They're going to fight dirty. They'll try to discredit you, dig into your past, make you look unstable or vindictive. Let them try. I'm serious. They'll look for anything. Old relationships, financial problems, psychiatric records from your military service. There are no psychiatric records. I passed every eval. Even better, but they'll still try. Maura's voice softened slightly. How are you holding up? Sarah looked at herself in the mirror across the room. She looked exactly like what she was, exhausted, angry, running on spite and coffee. I'm fine. You don't have to be. This is a lot. I've had worse weeks. After she hung up, Sarah finally left the motel room. The reporter from KPRC was gone, but had been replaced by 2 others, both waiting by their vans, probably hoping for an interview. Sarah ignored them and drove to a diner 3 miles down the highway. She ordered eggs and toast and sat in a corner booth with her back to the wall, old habit from field deployments. The diner was mostly empty except for truck drivers and early shift workers, none of whom paid her any attention. She was halfway through breakfast when someone slid into the booth across from her. Sarah looked up. The woman was in her 40s, wearing scrubs under a fleece jacket, dark circles under her eyes. You're Sarah Reeves, the woman said. Not a question. And you are? Michelle Torres. I'm a nurse at Mercy Point. Was a nurse. She corrected herself bitterly. I got fired this morning. Sarah set down her fork. Why? For talking to investigators. They asked me about Brennan's surgical outcomes, and I told them the truth. Torres laughed without humor. Voss called it providing unauthorized information to outside parties during an active investigation, said I violated patient confidentiality protocols. Did you? I gave them statistics. No patient names, no identifying information, just numbers showing Brennan's complication rates compared to other surgeons. Torres pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a spreadsheet. He's got a post-op infection rate 3 times higher than the hospital average. Unplanned return to OR rate twice as high, but nobody's supposed to notice because he brings in revenue. Sarah studied the numbers. They told a story of consistent, dangerous incompetence masked by institutional indifference. Why are you showing me this? Sarah asked. Because you're the only person who fought back and survived long enough for it to matter. Torres put away her phone. I've been at Mercy Point for 12 years. I've watched good nurses get destroyed for speaking up. I've watched patients suffer from preventable complications. And I kept my head down because I have 2 kids and a mortgage, and I couldn't afford to lose my job. Her voice cracked slightly. Until this morning when I realized keeping my job meant being complicit in people dying. You should talk to David Mora. He's building a case. Already did. That's why I'm here. He said you might need someone who can walk investigators through hospital records and explain what they mean in plain language. Torres met her eyes. I know where all the bodies are buried, Sarah, metaphorically speaking. Every buried complaint, every settled lawsuit, every time Voss rewrote an incident report to protect Brennan. I can help you burn it all down. Sarah studied her for a long moment. What about your kids? Your mortgage? I'll figure it out. Some things matter more than job security. Torres stood. My number's on my card. Call me if you need anything. And Sarah? Thank you for not backing down. After Torres left, Sarah finished her breakfast in silence. Her phone buzzed constantly. More interview requests, more nurses coming forward, more reporters digging deeper. The story was metastasizing beyond anyone's control now, taking on a life of its own. She paid her check and drove back toward Pinehurst. She hadn't planned on returning to the city where she'd been humiliated and fired, but Mora needed her to give a deposition, and the state investigators wanted to interview her in person. The city looked different in daylight, less intimidating, just another mid-sized Texas town with chain restaurants and strip malls, and people going about their lives unaware that one of their major employers was currently imploding. Sarah pulled into the parking lot of Mora's law office at 11:45. The building was modest, a converted house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing flashy. She was reaching for the door handle when a black SUV pulled up beside her. A woman in a business suit climbed out. Late 50s, perfectly styled hair, the kind of person who radiated expensive legal representation. Miss Reeves, I'm Catherine Brennan, Marcus's wife. Sarah's hand stayed on the door handle. What do you want? 5 minutes of your time, please. Sarah considered refusing, then curiosity won out. She rolled down her window instead of getting out. Talk. Catherine Brennan didn't look angry or defensive. She looked tired. I'm not here to defend my husband. I'm here to ask you to consider the collateral damage of what you're doing. You mean holding him accountable? I mean destroying a man's entire life and career over a workplace disagreement. Sarah's laugh was sharp. A workplace disagreement. Is that what you call nearly killing patients through negligence? Marcus made mistakes. He admits that. But he's a good surgeon who's helped hundreds of people. Doesn't that count for something? Not when weighed against the people he hurt because he refused to listen to warnings. Catherine's composure cracked slightly. My daughter is getting death threats at school. Our house has been vandalized. Someone threw a brick through our window last night with a note calling Marcus a murderer. Her voice shook. We've lost everything already. Our reputation, our friends, our sense of safety. Isn't that enough? Sarah looked at her directly. Daniel Patterson spent 2 weeks in ICU because your husband ignored my warnings. A construction worker named Davies nearly died on an operating table because your husband's ego was more important than patient safety. How many other people suffered while you lived in your nice house with your intact windows? That's not fair. Fair? Your husband called my military service fake in front of witnesses. He got me fired for being right. He built a career on silencing people who threatened his authority. Sarah's voice was cold. I didn't destroy his life. He did that himself by being incompetent and arrogant. I just made sure everyone knew about it." "Please." Catherine's eyes were wet now. "He's talking about suicide. He can't eat, can't sleep. He's destroyed. Isn't that enough revenge for you?" Sarah felt something twist in her chest. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition of pain. She'd seen enough broken people to know what real desperation looked like. "This isn't about revenge," she said quietly. "It's about making sure he never hurts another patient. If he's destroyed, it's because he chose his ego over people's lives repeatedly until someone finally had enough proof to stop him." She started rolling up her window. "You want to help your husband? Get him therapy. Get him to take actual responsibility instead of sending his wife to beg for mercy he never showed anyone else." Catherine stood in the parking lot watching as Sarah drove into a space and walked into Maura's office without looking back. Inside, Maura was waiting with his assistant and a court reporter. They spent 3 hours going through Sarah's statement, every detail of Davy's surgery, every interaction with Brennan, every step of her termination. The court reporter's fingers flew across the stenotype machine, recording everything. When they finished, Maura showed her the formal complaint. "We're filing this afternoon," he said. "Once it's public record, the media coverage is going to intensify. You ready for that? Does it matter if I'm not?" "No, but I like to ask anyway." He slid another document across the desk. "This is from the State Medical Board. They're expediting Brennan's license review based on the evidence we've provided. Hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from now. They want you to testify." Sarah scanned the document. "Will he be there?" "Yes. It's his license, so he has the right to face his accusers." Maura watched her carefully. "You'll be in the same room as him, answering questions while he watches. Can you handle that?" Sarah thought about Kandahar, about treating wounded soldiers while mortars hit close enough to shake the walls, about holding pressure on a femoral artery for 40 minutes straight because the surgeon was delayed and if she let go, the Marine would die. "I'll manage," she said. She left Maura's office at 3:47 and drove toward the motel, planning to pack up and find somewhere quieter to wait out the next 2 weeks. She was stopped at a red light when her phone rang. Jennifer Wu, the resident who'd posted the OR video. "Sarah? I need help." Sarah pulled into a parking lot. "What's wrong?" "Brennan cornered me outside the hospital 20 minutes ago. Started screaming that I destroyed his career, that I was a traitor, that he'd make sure I never finished my residency." Wu's voice was shaking. "He grabbed my arm. I pulled away, and he fell. Hit his head on the curb. There's blood, and he's not moving, and people are filming, and I don't know what to do." "Did you call 911? They're already here." "But Sarah, this is bad. Someone's going to say I assaulted him, that I pushed him intentionally. My career is over before it even started." "Where are you now?" "Mercy Point parking lot. Security is holding me here until police arrive." Sarah checked the time. She could be there in 12 minutes. "Don't say anything to anyone without a lawyer present. Not security, not police, not administrators. You understand?" "I can't afford a lawyer. I'll call Maura. He'll send someone. Just stay quiet until they arrive." Sarah was already pulling back onto the road. "I'm coming there now." She made it in 10 minutes, drove past 3 news vans and a growing crowd of hospital employees standing outside the main entrance. Wu sat on a concrete bench near the ER entrance, a security guard standing nearby, looking young and scared and like she might throw up any second. Sarah parked illegally and walked over. The security guard stepped forward. "You can't be here. I'm Sarah Reeves. I'm staying with Miss Wu until her legal representation arrives." The guard recognized her name. Everyone did now. He hesitated, then stepped back slightly. Sarah sat beside Wu and spoke quietly. "Tell me exactly what happened." Wu took a shaky breath. "I was walking to my car. He came out of nowhere, started yelling. I tried to walk away and he grabbed my arm, hard, left marks." She pushed up her sleeve, showing red finger-shaped bruises already forming. "I pulled free and he lunged forward, lost his balance, fell backward and hit his head on the curb." "Did anyone else see it?" "At least 5 people. They're over there." Wu gestured toward a cluster of employees being interviewed by police. An ambulance was parked near the ER entrance, paramedics loading someone onto a stretcher. Sarah caught a glimpse of Brennan, unconscious, neck brace, blood matting his hair. A police officer approached them. Young, professional, hand resting near his weapon in that casual way cops did. Jennifer Wu? Wu nodded. I need you to come with me to give a statement about what happened here. She's not saying anything without her lawyer, Sarah said. The officer looked at her. And you are? Sarah Reeves, a witness to Miss Wu's character, and someone making sure her rights are protected. The officer's expression changed. Recognition, maybe respect, hard to tell. Miss Wu, you're not under arrest, but we need to understand what happened. Dr. Brennan has a serious head injury, and multiple witnesses say there was a physical altercation. She defended herself from assault, Sarah said. Look at her arm. The officer glanced at the bruises. That'll be documented, but I still need her statement. A car pulled into the lot. Fast. Urgent. David Mora climbed out with another attorney, a woman in her 30s wearing a sharp suit. Don't say anything, the woman called out, walking quickly toward them. Officer, I'm Rebecca Sharp, representing Miss Wu. My client won't be giving any statements today. There's been an assault, self-defense against an aggressor who grabbed her first, leaving visible injuries. Sharp held out her phone, showing a photo she'd clearly just taken of Wu's arm. If you're planning to charge my client with anything, we'll be filing a counter-complaint for assault and battery against Dr. Brennan. The officer looked between them, clearly calculating whether this was worth the fight. We're still investigating. Don't leave town. After he walked away, Sharp turned to Wu. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention? I'm fine, just scared. Understandable, but you did the right thing pulling away from him. Sharp looked at Sarah. Thank you for calling. This could have gone much worse if she'd started talking without representation. Sarah nodded. What happens now? Depends on whether Brennan wants to press charges. My guess? He won't. Too much attention on his behavior? Too many witnesses saying he grabbed her first. Sharp helped Wu stand. Come on, let's get you somewhere away from cameras. Sarah watched them leave, then turned to find Mora standing beside her. Hell of a week you're having, he said. It's only Wednesday. Feels longer, doesn't it? He gestured toward the ambulance pulling away with Brennan inside. This complicates things. If he's seriously injured, his lawyers will use it for sympathy, paint him as the victim. He assaulted a resident and fell because he was out of control. I know, but optics matter in court. A man lying in a hospital bed with a head injury looks sympathetic regardless of how he got there. Mora watched the ambulance disappear around a corner. We need to control the narrative before his team does. I'm calling Cross, giving her the full story with witness statements. By tonight, everyone will know he attacked Wu first. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Catherine Brennan. My husband is in surgery for a subdural hematoma. He might not survive. I hope you're satisfied. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Another text came through immediately. If he dies, his blood is on your hands. All of this, the investigation, the lawsuit, the public humiliation, you pushed him to this. You destroyed him. Sarah typed back, he destroyed himself. I just made sure people knew about it. She blocked the number. Mora was watching her. You okay? Fine. You don't look fine. I'm standing in the parking lot of a hospital that fired me, watching the surgeon who nearly killed multiple patients get loaded into an ambulance because he assaulted someone and fell. I've had better days. Sarah rubbed her eyes. But I'm fine. Her phone rang. Henshaw. Colonel? She answered. Sarah. I'm seeing reports that Brennan was injured outside Mercy Point. You involved? Only tangentially. He attacked a resident I know. She defended herself. He fell. Is she okay? Shaken, but unharmed. She's got a good lawyer. Henshaw was quiet for a moment. How are you holding up? And don't give me the I'm fine line. I know what that sounds like when it's not true. Sarah looked around the parking lot. News vans, police cars, hospital employees watching from windows. Honestly, I don't know. Everything's moving so fast I haven't had time to process any of it. That's normal. You've been in crisis mode for 72 hours straight, but crisis mode has a limit before you burn out. I can't afford to burn out yet. I know. Just remember, you don't have to do this alone. You've got people backing you. He paused. Also, I pulled some strings. The Veterans Medical Association is sending a formal statement of support to the medical board before Brennan's hearing. character witness testimony from your commanding officers, documentation of your combat trauma training. They're going to make it very clear you know exactly what you're talking about. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. You earned it. He hung up. By evening, the story had evolved again. News outlets were reporting Brennan's injury alongside Wu's assault complaint, witness statements, photos of her bruises. The narrative shifted from doctor injured in altercation to disgraced surgeon attacks whistleblower resident. Sarah watched it unfold from a new motel room 30 miles outside Pinehurst. The media had found her previous location, made it impossible to stay. This new place was quieter, cheaper, the kind of anonymous space where she could think. Her laptop showed 17 different news articles, all covering different angles of the same story. Brennan's surgery, Wu's statement, the federal investigation, the class action lawsuit, Mercy Point's stock price dropping, Voss being placed on administrative leave. It was all happening faster than she'd imagined possible. The institutions she'd assumed were untouchable were crumbling under scrutiny. The people who'd seemed invincible were facing actual consequences. Her phone buzzed. Amanda Cross. Just got a tip. Brennan's lawyer is planning a press conference tomorrow morning. They're going to claim you orchestrated a coordinated attack to destroy his reputation. Wanted to give you a heads up. Sarah typed back, let them. Everything I've said is documented and true. Will you give a statement in response? Sarah thought about it. Every instinct said to stay quiet, let the facts speak for themselves. But silence could be misinterpreted as guilt or uncertainty. Yes, I'll give a statement. Tomorrow afternoon, after his press conference, I'll set it up. Public location, full media presence. You ready for that? I've been ready since he called my service fake in a parking lot. Sarah closed her laptop and lay back on the bed. Tomorrow would bring another escalation, another battle. Brennan's lawyers would attack her credibility, her motives, her character. They'd try to reframe the entire narrative around a bitter employee seeking revenge. And she'd stand in front of cameras and tell the truth in her own words, with her own voice, backed by evidence and witnesses and a service record they couldn't dispute. She thought about Catherine Brennan's message, about the accusation that she'd pushed him to this, that his blood would be on her hands if he died. Sarah felt no guilt about that. She'd given Brennan the same chance she'd given every patient in her care, a warning, an opportunity to change course, a moment where things could have gone differently. He'd chosen to ignore it, just like he'd ignored every nurse who'd ever tried to warn him about anything. The difference was, this time the consequences had found him. Her phone lit up with one more message. This one from Daniel Patterson. Saw the news about Dr. Brennan getting hurt. My mom keeps saying maybe we should drop the lawsuit, that he suffered enough. But I keep thinking about the 2 weeks I spent in ICU, about how my family thought I might die, about how he never apologized, never acknowledged he'd done anything wrong. So I told her we're not dropping anything, just wanted you to know. Sarah read the message 3 times, then typed back, "Thank you. That means more than you know." She set the phone down and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be ugly. Brennan's team would come out swinging, trying to shift public opinion, trying to make her look vindictive and cruel. But she had something they didn't. The truth. And 7 nurses, 3 patients, 2 administrators, 5 years of combat trauma experience, and a colonel willing to testify that she was exactly who she said she was. Let them come. She was ready. Somewhere in Pinehurst, in a hospital bed surrounded by machines and lawyers, Marcus Brennan was learning what it felt like to be vulnerable and ignored and dismissed while people in power made decisions about his future without his input. Somewhere in that same city, Helen Voss was watching federal investigators box up files that would expose years of buried complaints and institutional corruption. Somewhere in deputy barracks in Coldwell County, Ryan Cole was suspended without pay, facing criminal charges and watching his body cam footage replay across every news network in the country. And somewhere in a quiet motel room, Sarah Reeves, the woman they'd all underestimated, dismissed, and tried to silence, was sleeping soundly for the first time in days. Because justice, real justice, wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure the people who'd caused harm finally faced the consequences they'd spent years avoiding. And tomorrow, the whole world was going to watch it happen. Brennan's press conference started at 9 a.m. in the conference room of an expensive downtown law firm. Sarah watched it live from her motel room, standing with her arms crossed, coffee untouched on the dresser. Brennan sat in a wheelchair, head bandaged, looking frail and wounded. His lawyer, a silver-haired man named Richard Kavanaugh, who probably charged $500 an hour, stood at a podium covered in microphones. Dr. Marcus Brennan is a dedicated physician who has served this community for 15 years, Kavanaugh began, his voice smooth and practiced. He has performed over 3,000 successful surgeries. He has saved countless lives. And now his career, his reputation, and his health have been destroyed by a coordinated campaign of character assassination led by a disgruntled former employee. Sarah's jaw tightened. Kavanaugh continued. Miss Sarah Reeves was terminated from Mercy Point Regional Hospital for repeated violations of protocol, insubordination, and creating a hostile work environment. Rather than accept responsibility for her own professional failures, she has weaponized social media and a complicit press to paint herself as a victim and Dr. Brennan as a villain. The camera cut to Brennan, who managed to look both wounded and dignified. He spoke in a weak voice. I never meant to hurt anyone. If I made mistakes, they were honest errors in judgment made under pressure. But I don't deserve this. My family doesn't deserve this. He paused, seeming to gather strength. Miss Reeves has destroyed my career, my health, and my ability to provide for my family. All because I had to make a difficult personnel decision. Sarah turned off the television. Her phone was already buzzing with messages from reporters asking for her response. She ignored them and called Maura instead. You watching this? She asked. Every word. He's playing the sympathy card hard. Maura sounded more amused than concerned. It's a smart strategy if you don't have facts on your side. Make it about emotion and persecution instead of evidence. Will it work? Not after we present what we've got. His team is betting on public opinion swaying before the medical board hearing. They want people to see him as a victim, so when the evidence comes out, there's already doubt planted. Maura's keyboard clicked. But we've got something they don't know about yet. Which is? 3 more patients came forward this morning, all treated by Brennan in the last 2 years, all with complications that match the pattern of ignored nursing warnings. One of them has internal hospital emails showing Voss personally intervened to block a formal complaint. Sarah felt a cold satisfaction. When do we release that? At your press conference this afternoon. Let Brennan have his moment, then we bury him with documentation. Sarah's press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at a community center near downtown Pinehurst. Maura had arranged everything, proper venue, media credentials, even security in case things got heated. Sarah arrived at 1:30 wearing clean jeans and a plain blouse, her old army jacket left in the car. The room was packed. Every major news outlet in Texas, several national networks, reporters from medical journals, and what looked like half of Pinehurst's population crammed into folding chairs or standing along the walls. Maura met her at the side entrance. You ready? As I'll ever be. Remember, stick to facts. Don't get emotional. Don't attack Brennan personally. Just lay out what happened and let the evidence speak. I know. And if they ask about his injury, I'll say I hope he recovers and that it doesn't change anything about what he did to patients and nurses. Maura smiled slightly. Good. You'll do fine. Sarah walked onto the small stage and sat at a table with 2 microphones. The room quieted immediately. Cameras focused. Reporters leaned forward. Amanda Cross stood to ask the first question. Miss Reeves, Dr. Brennan's attorney claims you're conducting a personal vendetta. How do you respond? Sarah looked directly into the cameras. I'm not conducting a vendetta. I'm documenting a pattern of medical negligence that put patients at risk. Dr. Brennan fired me for questioning his judgment during a surgery where a patient nearly died. Hours later, I saved lives at a mass casualty scene using the same trauma training he called fake. The irony isn't lost on me. Another reporter stood. But don't you bear some responsibility for the public attention this has received? You could have pursued this quietly through proper channels. I tried proper channels. I filed concerns with my supervisor. I spoke up during procedures. I followed protocol exactly as trained. Sarah's voice remained calm. The hospital's response was to fire me and publicly humiliate me. So yes, when video of that humiliation went viral, I chose to explain why it happened. If that makes administrators uncomfortable, maybe they should reconsider how they treat staff who speak up. What about Dr. Brennan's injury? Do you feel any responsibility for pushing him to a breaking point? Sarah met the reporter's eyes. Dr. Brennan assaulted a young resident physician and fell while she was defending herself. That's documented by 5 witnesses and physical evidence. I had nothing to do with that incident except knowing the resident he attacked. She paused. But I'll note that his first instinct when confronted was physical aggression against someone who couldn't fight back. That tells you something about his character. Morris stood and placed several folders on the table. We're prepared to release documentation supporting Miss Reeves' claims. These include testimony from 7 nurses who experienced similar retaliation at Mercy Point, 3 patients who suffered complications after nursing warnings were ignored, and internal emails showing hospital administration actively suppressing complaints against Dr. Brennan. He opened the first folder and held up a printed email chain. This is from Helen Voss to the hospital's risk management team, dated 18 months ago. A nurse reported that Dr. Brennan's post-op infection rates were concerning and requested a peer review. Voss's response was to transfer that nurse to night shift in a different department and close the complaint without investigation. Murmurs rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in on the document. Mora continued, "We have similar emails covering 4 years. Every time a complaint was filed, it was either dismissed, the complainant was transferred or terminated, or the records were altered to minimize the concern." He placed another stack of papers on the table. These are surgical outcome reports comparing Dr. Brennan's complication rates to other surgeons at similar hospitals. His rates are significantly higher across multiple metrics. A reporter called out, "Why didn't the medical board catch this earlier?" Because the hospital never reported the complaints. They handled everything internally and buried anything that made them look bad. Mora gestured to Sarah. "Miss Reeves isn't an outlier. She's just the first person whose firing was public enough that they couldn't bury it." Sarah fielded questions for another 40 minutes. Most were fair, some were hostile. A few seemed designed to trip her up. She answered each one calmly, referring to specific incidents and documented evidence. When someone asked if she regretted speaking up, Sarah didn't hesitate. "No. I regret that patients were hurt. I regret that good nurses lost their jobs for doing the right thing. But I don't regret fighting back against a system designed to protect reputation over safety." The press conference ended at 3:47. By 4:15, clips were circulating online. By 5 o'clock, legal analysts were dissecting Mora's evidence on cable news. By 6 o'clock, Mercy Point's board of directors announced an emergency meeting to discuss recent allegations and leadership concerns. Sarah watched it all from Mora's office, eating takeout Chinese food and scrolling through reactions on her laptop. "You did good today," Mora said, reviewing his own notes. "Came across credible, measured, focused on facts instead of emotion. Doesn't feel like enough." "It never does. But you moved the needle. Public opinion is shifting." He showed her a poll from a local news station. 73% of respondents believed Sarah's account. Only 18% sided with Brennan. Sarah's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then recognized the area code, Washington, D.C. "This is Sarah." "Miss Reeves, this is Senator Patricia Aldridge. I serve on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee." The voice was crisp, professional. "I've been following your situation closely. Would you be willing to testify before Congress about systemic failures in holding hospitals accountable for retaliation against medical staff?" Sarah blinked. "Testify before Congress? We're investigating gaps in whistleblower protections for healthcare workers. Your case illustrates several critical issues: institutional suppression of safety concerns, retaliation against qualified professionals, lack of oversight. Your testimony could help us craft better legislation." Yes. I'd be willing to testify." "Excellent. My office will be in touch with details. Thank you for your service, Miss Reeves, both in the military and now." After she hung up, Sarah sat staring at her phone. "What was that?" Mora asked. "Congress wants me to testify about hospital whistleblower protections." Mora's eyebrows rose. "Well, that's a development." Sarah's laugh was slightly hysterical. "A week ago, I was unemployed and arrested. Now I'm testifying before Congress." "Told you this was going to get big." Mora closed his laptop. "You should get some rest. The medical board hearing is in 10 days. That's going to be the real fight." Sarah drove back to her motel as the sun set, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and purple. Her phone continued buzzing with messages. Supporters, reporters, other nurses sharing their own stories of retaliation. She was reading through them when a call came from an unfamiliar local number. She answered cautiously. Sarah Reeves? Yes? This is Dr. Richard Torres, State Medical Board. I'm calling to inform you that we've accelerated Dr. Brennan's license review hearing to this Friday based on new evidence that's come to light. Sarah sat up. What new evidence? We received an anonymous submission this afternoon. Internal hospital quality control reports from the last 6 years showing Brennan's complication rates were flagged multiple times but never addressed. The reports were marked confidential internal review and appear to have been deliberately withheld from our board during Brennan's previous license renewals. Who sent them? The submission was anonymous, but the documents are authentic. We verified them against hospital records. Torres paused. Miss Reeves, these reports show a clear pattern of institutional knowledge about Dr. Brennan's performance issues. If administration knew and did nothing, that's grounds for serious sanctions against the hospital itself. Good. The hearing is Friday at 10 a.m. in Austin. You're required to testify as a primary witness. Will you be available? I'll be there. After Torres hung up, Sarah sat in her car watching the last light fade from the sky. Someone inside Mercy Point had leaked those quality control reports. Someone with access to confidential files. Someone who'd decided the institutional cover-up had gone far enough. Her money was on Michelle Torres, the nurse who'd been fired for talking to investigators. Or maybe one of the administrators who'd contacted Mora, trying to save themselves. Either way, the walls were closing in on everyone who'd protected Brennan. The next morning, news broke that Helen Voss had resigned as hospital administrator to pursue other opportunities. The statement was corporate speak for being forced out, and everyone knew it. By afternoon, Mercy Point's board announced they were hiring an independent firm to conduct a comprehensive review of all surgical outcomes and complaint procedures from the past decade. By evening, 3 more nurses had joined Mora's class action lawsuit, bringing the total to 10. Sarah spent Thursday preparing for the medical board hearing with Mora and 2 medical expert witnesses he'd hired to review Brennan's surgical records. They sat in a conference room surrounded by case files, going through each incident methodically. Davy's case is the strongest, one expert said, a retired trauma surgeon named Dr. Patricia Okafor. The operative notes show classic signs of retroperitoneal bleeding that any competent surgeon should have recognized. The fact that he dismissed nursing concerns and nearly lost the patient is indefensible. What about Patterson's appendectomy? Mora asked. The second expert, Dr. James Liu, flipped through the file. Post-op complications here were preventable. Nursing notes document concerns about the patient's declining condition being reported to Dr. Brennan repeatedly. He ordered minimal intervention. Patient ended up septic and in ICU for 2 weeks. Liu looked up. Pattern is clear. He doesn't listen to nursing staff, assumes he knows better, and patients suffer as a result. They worked until past midnight, building a timeline of negligence so comprehensive that Sarah felt sick reading it. 12 patients over 4 years with documented complications after ignored warnings. 12 people who'd trusted Brennan with their lives and nearly died because his ego was more important than their safety. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. Sarah drove to Austin with Mora, both of them quiet during the 2-hour trip. The medical board hearing would be held in a government building downtown, open to the public per state law. They arrived at 9:15 to find the building surrounded by news vans and protesters. Some held signs supporting Sarah, "Listen to nurses and Brennan should lose his license." Others supported Brennan, "Doctors are human too," and "Stop the witch hunt." Security ushered them through a side entrance to avoid the crowds. Inside, the hearing room was formal. Wood paneling, state seal on the wall, a long table where 5 board members sat reviewing documents. Brennan was already there with Kavanaugh and 2 other lawyers, sitting in a wheelchair looking pale. Sarah took her seat at the witness table. Brennan's eyes met hers across the room, angry, desperate, wounded. She looked away. The board chairman, Dr. Edward Morrison, called the hearing to order at exactly 10 a.m. This is a disciplinary hearing regarding the medical license of Dr. Marcus Brennan, MD. The board has received multiple complaints alleging negligence, failure to maintain professional standards, and endangerment of patients. Dr. Brennan has the right to face his accusers and present a defense. Morrison looked at Sarah. "Miss Reeves, you're the primary complainant. Please state your testimony for the record." Sarah stood and was sworn in. Then she told the whole story, calmly, methodically, with specific dates and medical details. Davy's surgery. the argument, her termination, the pattern of ignored warnings. Kavanaugh cross-examined aggressively. Miss Reeves, you have no medical degree, correct? Correct. I'm a registered nurse with combat trauma certification. So you're not qualified to diagnose internal bleeding or make surgical decisions. I'm qualified to recognize the signs and report concerns to the attending physician, which I did. But Dr. Brennan, with 15 years of surgical experience, disagreed with your assessment, and the patient nearly died because of it. Or the patient had unexpected complications that occur in surgery regardless of skill or preparation. Sarah's voice hardened. The bleeding I identified was exactly where I said it would be. Dr. Brennan ignored my warning and had to be corrected by a resident after the patient coded. That's not unexpected complications. That's negligence. The cross-examination continued for 90 minutes. Kavanaugh tried every angle, questioning her qualifications, her motives, her emotional stability. Sarah answered each question the same way, with facts, with documented evidence, without losing her temper. Then Maura called Dr. Okafor to testify. She walked the board through 12 cases with surgical precision, explaining in clinical language exactly how each deviation from standard care had endangered patients. Dr. Brennan's pattern shows a consistent failure to incorporate nursing observations into his clinical decision-making, Okafor concluded. This isn't about occasional mistakes. It's about systemic disregard for the collaborative nature of patient care. Dr. Liu testified next, presenting the statistical analysis comparing Brennan's outcomes to peer surgeons. The numbers were damning. Complication rates 50% higher, unplanned return to OR rates double the average, post-op infection rates 3 times normal. During a recess, Sarah stepped outside for air. The hallway was crowded with people waiting to testify. Nurses, patients, administrators. Michelle Torres caught her eye and nodded. Daniel Patterson gave her a thumbs up. Jennifer Wu stood near a window, still looking shaken from her own assault. She approached Sarah hesitantly. "Thank you," Wu said quietly, "for everything. I would have given up if you hadn't called Maura. You defended yourself. That took courage. I'm still terrified I'll lose my residency over this." "You won't. You've got documentation and witnesses. And if the hospital tries anything, you've got grounds for a lawsuit that'll make mine look small." Sarah touched her shoulder briefly. "You did the right thing pulling away from him. Never doubt that." When the hearing resumed, the board called witnesses from Mercy Point. 2 administrators testified about Brennan's surgical volume and revenue generation, clearly trying to present him as valuable to the hospital. But under questioning, they admitted awareness of complaint patterns and higher than average complication rates. Then Michelle Torres took the stand. "How long did you work at Mercy Point?" Morrison asked. 12 years. "And during that time, did you ever have concerns about Dr. Brennan's surgical practices?" Torres took a breath. "Multiple times. I personally filed 3 formal complaints about his post-op care and dismissiveness toward nursing staff. All 3 were closed by administration without investigation." "What happened to you after filing those complaints?" "I was transferred to less desirable shifts, given negative performance reviews, eventually fired for talking to state investigators about his complication rates." Kavanaugh stood. "Objection. Ms. Torres's employment status is not relevant to Dr. Brennan's medical competence." Morrison looked at him coldly. "Her testimony establishes a pattern of institutional response to complaints. It's entirely relevant. Continue, Ms. Torres." Torres detailed years of buried concerns, ignored warnings, and administrative protection of Brennan despite mounting evidence of problems. By the time she finished, even Brennan's lawyers looked uncomfortable. The hearing lasted until 6 p.m. When Morrison finally adjourned for the board to deliberate, Sarah was exhausted. Maura drove her to a hotel near the building. The board would deliver their decision tomorrow morning. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed scrolling through news coverage of the hearing. Legal experts were split on the likely outcome, but most agreed the evidence was damning. Her phone buzzed at 11:43 p.m. Text from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing. You think you've won, but I still have options you haven't considered. This isn't over." Sarah stared at the message. It could have been from Brennan, from Voss, from any number of people whose careers were imploding. She blocked the number and tried to sleep. Morning arrived with rain. Sarah and Maura returned to the hearing room at 9 a.m. to find it even more packed than yesterday. The board filed in at 9:30, their faces unreadable. Morrison cleared his throat. The Texas Medical Board has reviewed all testimony and evidence presented regarding Dr. Marcus Brennan's medical license. We find the following. He read through procedural language for several minutes before getting to the substance. Dr. Brennan demonstrated a pattern of failing to adequately consider and respond to concerns raised by nursing staff, resulting in preventable patient harm in multiple documented cases. His surgical complication rates significantly exceed acceptable standards. His response to oversight and criticism shows a dangerous lack of professional accountability. Morrison looked directly at Brennan. Therefore, the board votes to revoke Dr. Marcus Brennan's medical license effective immediately. He is permanently barred from practicing medicine in the state of Texas and will be reported to the National Practitioner Database. The room erupted. Reporters surged forward. Brennan's face went white, then red. He started to stand from his wheelchair, then sat back down heavily. Kavanaugh was already arguing. This is excessive. Dr. Brennan has had a distinguished career. This board is bowing to media pressure. This board is protecting patients, Morrison cut him off. Dr. Brennan had numerous opportunities to change his behavior. He chose not to. The evidence of harm is overwhelming. He banged his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, barely processing what had just happened. Brennan's license was gone. His career was over. 15 years of practice ended in a single vote. Maura squeezed her shoulder. You did it. We did it, Sarah corrected quietly. Outside, reporters were screaming questions. Sarah gave a brief statement, thanking the board for protecting patients, hoping this would lead to broader reforms. Maura handled most of the questions while Sarah stood silently, watching rain fall on the courthouse steps. Her phone buzzed. Amanda Cross. Mercy Point just announced their filing for bankruptcy. Board voted to dissolve the hospital rather than face ongoing lawsuits and federal sanctions. Story breaking now. Sarah showed the message to Maura. He read it and whistled low. Entire hospital shutting down. That's bigger than I expected. How many people work there? Last I checked, about 800 employees. Sarah felt a twist of something complicated. Not quite guilt, but awareness of collateral damage. 800 people losing jobs because administrators chose to protect one surgeon instead of patients. Another message came through. This one from Senator Aldridge's office, confirming her congressional testimony was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Then another from the Veterans Medical Association, offering her a position as a patient safety consultant. Then another from a nursing school in Houston, asking if she'd be interested in teaching combat trauma techniques. Sarah stood in the rain watching offers and opportunities pour in. While just yards away, Brennan was being wheeled to a car by his lawyers, his face a mask of devastation and rage. She felt nothing looking at him. No satisfaction, no pity, just completion. A job finished, a wrong corrected. Maura pulled her under an overhang out of the rain. What are you going to do now? Sarah thought about it. I don't know. Testify to Congress? Maybe take one of these consulting positions. Figure out what comes next. You've got options now. That's something. Yeah. Sarah looked at him. What happens with the lawsuit? With Brennan's license gone and the hospital bankrupt, we'll negotiate settlements with the insurance companies. Probably takes 6 months, but everyone should get compensated. Maura smiled slightly. You changed healthcare policy in Texas, Sarah. The governor's already calling for legislation requiring hospitals to report all complaints to the medical board. You did that. Sarah nodded slowly. The rain was easing up, leaving the city washed clean and smelling of wet concrete. Her phone rang one more time. Henshaw. Saw the news, he said. Well done, Lieutenant. Thank you, sir. I mean it. You took on a corrupt system and won. Most people don't have that kind of spine. He paused. What's next for you? Still figuring that out? Well, when you do, let me know. Army's always looking for people who know how to fight the good fight. After he hung up, Sarah stood watching the rain stop and the sun break through clouds. Somewhere in Texas, Ryan Cole was still suspended, facing criminal charges and watching his career burn. Somewhere in Pinehurst, Helen Voss was updating her resume and trying to explain why she'd resigned from a hospital that was now bankrupt. Somewhere in an expensive house, Marcus Brennan was learning what it felt like to lose everything because he'd refused to listen. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Sarah Reeves was standing in the sun, unemployed but not broken, her name cleared and her service recognized and her future wide open with possibilities she'd never imagined a week ago. Mora's phone buzzed. He checked it and his expression changed. "What?" Sarah asked. "You need to see this." He showed her his screen. It was an email from an investigator at the Department of Justice. The subject line read, "Mercy Point Investigation. Criminal charges forthcoming." Sarah scanned the email. Federal prosecutors were filing charges against Helen Voss and 3 board members for fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to conceal medical malpractice. The investigation had uncovered evidence that they deliberately falsified quality reports and destroyed complaint records to maintain the hospital's accreditation and federal funding. "They're going to prison," Mora said quietly. "Not just losing jobs. Actual prison time." Sarah looked up at him. "When?" "Indictment's coming next week, according to this." She handed back his phone and stared at the courthouse. Everything she'd wanted was happening: accountability, consequences, justice. But somehow it felt heavier than she'd expected, more final, more devastating. "You okay?" Mora asked. "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I wanted them to face consequences. I wanted patients protected. But I didn't think that it would burn this hot this fast." "Yeah." Mora put his phone away. "You didn't do this, Sarah." "They did. Every choice that led here was theirs. You just made sure people knew about it." Sarah nodded, but the weight didn't lift. That evening, back in her motel room, Sarah packed her belongings. She'd been living out of a duffel bag for over a week. It was time to find something more permanent. She was folding clothes when someone knocked on the door. Sarah opened it to find Deputy Sergeant Hayes standing there, out of uniform, looking uncomfortable. "Miss Reeves? Got a minute?" Sarah let him in. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the small room. "Wanted to tell you in person," Hayes said. "Cole was formally charged today. Criminal arrest, civil rights violations, falsifying reports. DA's pushing for jail time. I heard, also wanted to apologize for what happened, for how our department treated you." Hayes met her eyes. "You saved my nephew's life. You saved other officers' lives. And one of our own arrested you and humiliated you because he was too stupid and arrogant to verify basic facts. You didn't arrest me. No, but I work for a department that hired him, that trained him, that gave him a badge and a gun and the authority to make those decisions." Hayes shook his head. "We failed you. I'm sorry." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "What happens to the department now?" "Full review by state oversight, new training protocols, better screening." He smiled without humor. "Basically, we get to rebuild from scratch because one deputy couldn't admit he was wrong." After Hayes left, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself feel everything she'd been holding back. The exhaustion, the anger, the grief for patients who'd been hurt and nurses who'd been silenced, the strange hollow feeling that came with winning a fight that never should have been necessary. She thought about calling someone, Mora, Henshaw, even her sister who she hadn't spoken to in months. But what would she say? That she'd won? That justice had been served? That everything was fixed now? None of it felt true. The system was broken. One hospital getting shut down and one surgeon losing his license didn't fix that. It just proved the system could be beaten if you had enough evidence and enough support and got lucky enough that your story went viral. Her phone buzzed with the news alert. Breaking. Federal grand jury indicts 5 former Mercy Point executives on fraud and obstruction charges. Sarah read the article. Voss and 4 board members, all facing multiple felony counts carrying potential prison sentences of 5 to 10 years. Another alert followed immediately. Former Deputy Ryan Cole pleads guilty to civil rights violations, faces up to 3 years in federal prison. Sarah set down her phone and looked at her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, older than her years, but not defeated. Never defeated. Tomorrow she'd drive back to Pinehurst and find an apartment. Next week she'd meet with the nursing school about teaching positions. In 3 weeks, she'd testify before Congress about whistleblower protections. But tonight, she sat alone in a motel room while the people who'd tried to destroy her faced consequences they'd spent years believing they were too important to face. Her phone rang one final time. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then changed her mind. "This is Sarah." Miss Reeves, this is Dr. Elizabeth Warren from Johns Hopkins Hospital. The voice was professional, confident. We're establishing a new patient safety program focused on elevating nursing expertise in clinical decision-making. Your situation has become a case study in how institutions fail when they ignore qualified staff. We'd like to offer you a position developing training protocols and leading implementation. Sarah closed her eyes. Can I think about it? Of course. Take your time. But Miss Reeves, what you did matters. You proved that speaking up can create change. We want to make sure that kind of courage is protected and encouraged instead of punished. After she hung up, Sarah sat in silence as night fell outside her window. Job offers. Congressional testimony. A lawsuit that would compensate patients and nurses who'd been harmed. Everything she'd fought for was falling into place. But somewhere in a federal courthouse, Helen Voss was being arraigned on criminal charges that would likely send her to prison. Somewhere in Pinehurst, Marcus Brennan was watching his entire life collapse. Somewhere in Caldwell County, Ryan Cole was negotiating a plea deal that would put him behind bars. Sarah had wanted justice. She'd gotten it, and somehow it felt exactly right and completely devastating all at once. She turned off the lights and lay in darkness, listening to traffic outside and the hum of the ice machine down the hall. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new paths forward. But tonight, Sarah Reeves, combat nurse, whistleblower, the woman they'd tried to silence, finally allowed herself to rest. The fight was over. And for the first time in her life, she'd won completely. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a conference room at Johns Hopkins Hospital, watching 40 nursing students take notes as she walked them through the Davies case step by step. The key moment wasn't when I spoke up during surgery, she said, advancing the slide presentation. It was the decision I made 3 seconds before that, whether to stay quiet and protect my job or speak up and protect the patient. A student raised her hand. But you got fired for speaking up. Doesn't that prove the system punishes people who do the right thing? Sarah smiled slightly. It proves the system tried to punish me. There's a difference. She clicked to the next slide, a photo of the medical board hearing. I got fired, then I got my voice back, then I got justice. The system only wins if you let silence be the final answer. After class, Sarah gathered her materials and checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Maura, 2 texts from Amanda Cross, and 1 email from Senator Aldridge's office confirming her testimony had led to the Hospital Whistleblower Protection Act passing committee review. She was reading the email when someone knocked on the open door. Daniel Patterson stood there, looking healthier than the last time she'd seen him, color in his face, no longer moving like everything hurt. "Thought I'd find you here," he said. "My sister's starting nursing school next semester. Wanted to sit in on one of your classes." Sarah gestured for him to enter. "How are you doing?" "Good. Really good, actually." Patterson sat in one of the student desks. "Got the settlement check last week. Used part of it to pay off medical bills. Rest is going toward my sister's tuition." He met her eyes. "Wanted to thank you in person. For everything." "You thanked me already. Multiple times." "I know, but this is different." He pulled out his phone and showed her a news article. "Brennan's appealing the license revocation. Claims the board was biased, that media pressure influenced their decision." Sarah felt a flicker of old anger. "Will it work?" "His lawyers don't think so, but they're filing anyway. Trying to extend the fight, make it expensive for everyone." Patterson put away his phone. "Point is, he's still fighting. Still refusing to admit he did anything wrong. And I wanted you to know that even if he somehow wins that appeal, what you did still mattered. Because I'm alive. Because other patients are safer now. Because my sister knows that speaking up is worth the cost." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Your sister sounds smart." "She is. Smarter than me, anyway." Patterson stood. "I won't keep you. Just wanted to say that whatever happens with Brennan's appeal, you already won the part that counts." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the empty classroom thinking about what he'd said. Brennan was still fighting, still trying to reclaim what he'd lost. Part of her had hoped he'd just disappear, accept defeat, fade into obscurity. But people like Brennan never disappeared quietly. They fought until the end, convinced their version of events would eventually be vindicated. Her phone rang. "Maura. You sitting down?" he asked. Should I be? Voss just took a plea deal. 15 months in federal prison, full cooperation with ongoing investigations, agreement to testify against the board members who helped her cover up complaints. Sarah absorbed this. 15 months seems light. It is, but her testimony is going to put the others away for 5 to 7 years each. Maura's keyboard clicked. Also, the bankruptcy court approved the settlement distribution. Every nurse in our lawsuit gets full compensation plus damages. Every patient gets medical expenses covered and pain and suffering settlements. When? Checks go out next month. Sarah, you're looking at close to $200,000 in damages and back pay. Sarah closed her eyes. She'd never cared about the money. Still didn't, really. But it meant something that the system had been forced to acknowledge harm in dollars and cents, put a number on the cost of being right. What about Cole? She asked. Sentencing is next week. DA's recommending 36 months. He'll probably serve 18 with good behavior. Sarah hung up and sat in the quiet classroom, processing. Voss going to prison. Cole going to prison. Board members facing years behind bars. Brennan's license gone, his career destroyed, his appeal unlikely to succeed. Everything she'd wanted, every consequence she'd fought for. And somehow it still didn't feel complete. That evening, Sarah drove to a veterans center in Baltimore where she'd been invited to speak about transitioning from military to civilian healthcare. The room was packed. Former combat medics, nurses, physicians, all struggling with the same questions she'd faced. How do you go from treating trauma in war zones to playing politics in hospital bureaucracies? How do you stay quiet when you've been trained to act fast and speak up? Sarah talked for 40 minutes about her experience, about the cost of speaking up and the cost of staying silent, about choosing battles and knowing when to fight. During the Q&A, a young veteran asked the question Sarah had been dreading. Do you regret it? Everything that happened, getting fired, the lawsuit, all of it. If you could go back, would you have just kept quiet? Sarah looked at him, 20-something, probably just finished his service, still carrying that military bearing that took years to shed. No, she said simply, because keeping quiet would have meant watching more patients get hurt. And I didn't survive Kandahar just to stand by and let people die from preventable mistakes in a civilian hospital. She paused. But I won't lie and say it was easy or that everything worked out perfectly. I lost my job. I lived in motels for weeks. I got death threats and hate mail and people calling me a liar. It cost me in ways I'm still processing. But you'd do it again, in a heartbeat. Sarah smiled slightly. Because the alternative was betraying everything I'd been taught about protecting people who can't protect themselves. And I can live with a lot of things, but not that. After the event, Sarah drove back to her apartment in Baltimore, a small one-bedroom she'd rented after accepting the Johns Hopkins position. It wasn't much, but it was hers. No motel rooms, no temporary housing, just a place where she could unpack and stay. She was making tea when her phone buzzed with a news alert. Ryan Cole. Sentenced to 24 months in federal prison for civil rights violations. Sarah read the article. Cole had been sentenced that afternoon, shown no remorse during his statement, and been led away in handcuffs while his family watched from the gallery. Another alert followed. Former Mercy Point executives accept plea deals in federal fraud case. 4 of the 5 board members had taken deals, 3 to 5 years each in exchange for testimony against the hospital's parent corporation, which was facing its own federal investigation for systematic fraud across multiple facilities. Sarah set down her phone and stared out her window at Baltimore's skyline. The city lights stretched out in patterns of orange and white. Thousands of people living their lives, unaware that somewhere in courtrooms and prisons, people who'd abused power were finally facing consequences. Her phone rang one more time. Henshaw. Saw the sentencing news, he said. How you holding up? Fine, tired. Ready for this to be over. It is over. You won. Doesn't feel like winning. Henshaw was quiet for a moment. You know what it feels like? Surviving. You survive people trying to destroy you. That's victory enough. After they hung up, Sarah realized he was right. This wasn't about triumph or vindication or watching enemies fall. It was about surviving intact, about maintaining integrity under pressure, about refusing to be broken by people who thought power made them untouchable. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., facing a panel of senators while cameras recorded every word. Senator Aldridge led the questioning. Ms. Reeves, in your professional opinion, what systemic changes would best protect healthcare workers who report safety concerns? Sarah spoke clearly into the microphone. Mandatory reporting of all complaints to state medical boards, not just internal hospital review. Federal protection for whistleblowers similar to what exists in other industries. And severe financial penalties for institutions that retaliate against staff who speak up. You experienced retaliation firsthand. Can you describe how that affected your ability to continue working in healthcare? I was fired, blacklisted, and publicly humiliated by people who valued their reputation over patient safety. If my story hadn't gone viral, I'd probably still be unemployed and struggling to explain a termination to other hospitals. Sarah leaned forward slightly. The system is designed to silence people like me. It only failed this time because I got lucky with media coverage and legal support. Most healthcare workers aren't that lucky. What message would you give to other nurses or medical staff who are afraid to report concerns? Sarah didn't hesitate. Document everything. Find allies. Know that staying silent protects the system, not patients. And understand that doing the right thing might cost you, but living with the consequences of silence costs more. The testimony lasted 2 hours. When it ended, several senators personally thanked her for her courage. Aldridge walked her out of the hearing room. Your testimony was powerful, the senator said. It's going to help us pass real protections. Will it actually change anything? It already has. 3 hospitals in Texas have implemented new whistleblower policies because of your case. Medical schools are using it as a teaching example. You changed the conversation. Sarah nodded, accepting this but not quite believing it yet. That night, she had dinner with Amanda Cross at a restaurant near Capitol Hill. Cross had been nominated for an investigative journalism award for her Mercy Point coverage. You think he'll actually stay quiet? Cross asked, referring to Brennan. Who knows? Part of me thinks he'll spend the rest of his life trying to rehabilitate his image. Sarah cut into her steak. But it doesn't matter anymore. The record's set. His license is gone. The truth is documented. Any regrets? Sarah considered this carefully. I regret that patients were hurt. I regret that good nurses lost their jobs before me. But fighting back? No, I don't regret that. Cross smiled. You're going to hate this, but you've become a symbol for nurses everywhere who've been dismissed or silenced. I didn't want to be a symbol. I just wanted to do my job. Yeah, well, sometimes doing your job makes you a symbol whether you want it or not. 4 months later, Sarah received a letter from the Texas Medical Board. Brennan's appeal had been denied. His license revocation was final and permanent. She read the letter twice, then filed it away in a drawer with all the other documents from the case: court filings, settlement papers, news articles, testimony transcripts. A complete record of everything that had happened. Then she closed the drawer and went to teach her afternoon class. Life moved forward in small, ordinary ways after that. Sarah taught. She consulted on patient safety programs. She spoke at conferences about empowering nursing staff. She lived in her apartment, made friends with colleagues, started dating a respiratory therapist who made her laugh and didn't treat her like a celebrity. The viral videos faded from social media. News coverage moved on to other stories. People stopped recognizing her on the street. But the changes lasted. The Hospital Whistleblower Protection Act passed and was signed into law. Medical schools revised their curricula to emphasize collaborative decision-making. 3 states implemented mandatory reporting requirements for hospital complaints. And somewhere in Texas, in courtrooms and prisons and unemployment offices, the people who tried to silence Sarah Reeves were learning that power without accountability was just borrowed time. On a cold afternoon in February, Sarah returned home to find a package waiting at her door. No return address. She opened it carefully and found a single item inside: her old military dog tags, the ones Cole had confiscated the night of her arrest. There was a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. Found these in evidence storage during case file review. Thought you'd want them back. Sergeant Hayes. Sarah held the tags in her hand, feeling their familiar weight. The chain was tarnished, the metal worn smooth. She'd replaced them months ago, had new ones issued through VA records. But these were the originals, the ones she'd worn through 3 deployments, the ones that had hung from her rearview mirror the night everything changed. She hooked them back onto the chain and put them around her neck, feeling the cool metal settle against her skin. Then she sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She'd been working on a training manual for combat trauma techniques, adapted to civilian emergency departments. The Veterans Medical Association wanted to publish it as a standardized curriculum. Sarah typed for 2 hours, losing herself in the technical details of triage protocols and hemorrhage control. This was the work that mattered, teaching others, sharing knowledge, making sure the skills she'd learned in war zones could save lives in peacetime. When she finally stopped typing, the sun had set, and her apartment was dark except for the glow of her laptop screen. Sarah looked at her reflection in the window, older than she'd been a year ago, tired in different ways, but not broken. Never broken. She thought about the young student who'd asked if she regretted speaking up, about Daniel Patterson telling her she'd already won the part that counted, about Henshaw saying survival was victory enough. They were all right. She'd survived people trying to destroy her. She'd maintained her integrity under pressure. She'd fought a corrupt system and won, not because she was special, but because she'd refused to be silent when silence was easier. And now she was teaching others to do the same. Sarah closed her laptop and looked at the dog tags hanging from her neck. Sarah Reeves, O positive, no religious preference. The same woman who'd been handcuffed at a gas station, fired from a hospital, and publicly humiliated by people who thought she was too insignificant to fight back. The same woman who'd proved them catastrophically wrong. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Wu. Finished my residency. Starting as an attending at a hospital with actual whistleblower protections. Thank you for showing me it was possible to fight and win. Sarah typed back, congratulations, you earned it. Another text came through, this one from Michelle Torres. Got hired at a new hospital. They specifically recruited me because of my testimony against Mercy Point. Said they wanted people who put patients first. World's changing. Sarah smiled and set down her phone. The world was changing. Slowly, painfully, imperfectly. But changing. Because she'd spoken up. Because she'd refused to let them bury the truth. Because she'd survived long enough for it to matter. Sarah stood and walked to her window, looking out at Baltimore's lights. Somewhere in those buildings were nurses working overnight shifts, making split-second decisions, weighing whether to speak up or stay quiet when they saw something wrong. And maybe, just maybe, some of them would remember her story, would remember that speaking up was dangerous but possible, that fighting back could cost you everything or give you more than you'd imagined, that staying silent protected the system, but breaking silence protected lives. Sarah touched the dog tags at her neck one more time, feeling their weight, their history, their proof that she was exactly who she'd always been. A combat nurse, a trauma specialist, someone who'd spent years keeping people alive in impossible conditions, someone who'd survived hell and bureaucracy and people who thought power made them untouchable, someone who'd proven that the truth, documented and persistent and backed by courage, was stronger than institutional corruption. Sarah Reeves, the woman they'd tried to silence, the woman who'd refused to stay quiet, the woman who'd won. Not because the ending was perfect or because everyone got exactly what they deserved, but because she'd fought for what mattered and survived intact. And in the end, that was the only victory that really counted.